All right. Hey, good evening, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. This is your afternoon tropical update, where for once we don't actually have any name storms immediately threatening the U.S. Normally, when I'm talking to you, it's because we got something on the horizon. But I want to spend a few minutes today and talk about the future a little bit down the road. We have had a lot of buzz on social media and amongst the weather people on these fine YouTubes and Facebooks and whatnot that have been talking about the potential for some tropical development next week in the Western Caribbean Sea. It looks like a broad area of low pressure may form up in this region and move somewhere towards the Gulf of Mexico. So this is going to be a bit further down the road. We're talking probably 5 to 7 days before this even begins to form, and probably another 5 days or so from that for any potential impact. So today is Tuesday, so we're talking about potentially something forming by next Tuesday and then moving towards the U.S. towards that next weekend or a week from this coming weekend. So quite a ways out, but I want to go ahead and lean ahead a little bit and talk a little bit about it and what we have right now. The rest of the Atlantic Basin is pretty quiet tonight. We have the remnants of TD8 or potential tropical cyclone 8, whatever we decided to call it, spinning down here in the eastern U.S. All this is going to eventually move out over the next day or two, and some drier air is going to invade a lot of the southeast U.S. We have the remnants of Tropical Depression Gordon out here. They're moving northward, could reform over the next couple of days, but no threat to land, well away from any land interests, which just leaves us with the Western Caribbean system. So nothing on the Hurricane Center's map so far. It'd probably be another 2 or 3 days before they put it on their map, but with a little bit more confidence. But we do have an unusually high model confidence. So what are we talking about? Well, in the broad scale, what we've had over the last probably week or two is you've had a lot of lower pressure over the eastern U.S. You've had a lot of troughing, as we call it, where the winds move down in this kind of U shape, versus ridging as when the winds move in kind of the horseshoe or the upside down shape. So you kind of have, in this case, you have a ridge moving up into Canada north of the Great Lakes. And then you have a low pressure or a trough out over Florida and over the Carolinas. So what you've had is between Francine and TD8 and whatever else, you've had this pretty consistent area of lower pressure for the last week or so. And what this has been doing, it's been gradually disturbing the weather across the Western Caribbean. It's been kind of causing some surface convergence, divergence aloft, and it's starting to signal that this pattern is going to set up. It's very common this time of year when we get towards the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, and the weather pattern becomes more chaotic, like it has been in September. It can trigger these CAGs to form. So let's go ahead and show you over on the 850 millibar map what we're talking about. So this is Saturday evening on the GFS here over on Tropical Tidbits, and we are looking at a broad scale wind flow at 850 millibars. And we can see here, if we follow the wind barbs around, it shows this broad low pressure area over Central America and the Yucatan. So this is not an organized tropical system. It's very large, and it's not really focused. It's just a very broadly spinning area of low pressure. I use this analogy a lot, but the teacup ride at the fair, where it has like a big platform that's spinning, but then the teacups kind of spin inside of the broadly spinning platform. This would be the platform, and then the storm that forms would be one of the teacups, for if you're trying to conceptualize this in your head. So what happens is this forms up, and then over time it becomes more of a petri dish or a breeding ground for tropical systems. And all you need is a little bit of a kick, a little bit of a catalyst. And a lot of times what happens is we have a tropical wave, say, moving through the eastern Caribbean towards the western Caribbean, a wave that doesn't have much chance to develop on its own. It gets over here and it hits the edge of this CAG in this area. It finds very warm water, it finds abundant moisture, and it finds an environment where air already wants to rise and wants to continue to rise and grow, and thunderstorms want to develop, and then it just lights it off. And that's very well what might happen with this system. And there's a few other factors I think that are very interesting at play. So we'll back up the 200 millibar wind over on the GFS. So we're still over the weekend here. We're still in our minds. We're still looking at Saturday into Sunday. And as we go into the weekend, this is way up in the atmosphere. We're like near the top of what we see as sensible weather in our atmosphere. 200 millibars, very high up. Wind flows a little bit differently up here than it does down at the surface, but what you have broadly is this big trough in the upper levels digging down, and you have a lot of energy trying to get down into this trough and then turn and get back out. Well, over time, the physics don't really allow for this to happen forever. So what this is doing currently, it's evacuating mass from this region of the Caribbean. You see all these wind barbs and these wind streams moving away from the area in the upper levels. That means if you look up above your head, air is moving away, which means air has to rise to fill that void of where that air was. It's called divergence aloft. This is what pulls air up and actually creates upward vertical motion, one of the basic tenets of meteorology. And what this is going to eventually do is it's going to break off because the energy eventually gets too strong and then it cuts this trough off and then it stops turning that far to get down to that trough basin. So as we go in the next couple of days, we go into early next week, what we see here is that we have a little bit of a low break off and move away. And then we have the actual trough moving over here. And what you have in the middle is an area of higher pressure, higher heights. And this is going to shield a potential storm from developing in from significant wind shear. And it's still going to be pulling mass away from it aloft. So it's going to help make outflow for the storm. And that is a pretty favorable upper level environment for a potential system trying to form. So we have favorable upper levels. Water temperature is not an issue. This is the current look over here on Tropical Tidbits for the actual sea surface temperatures. They're 31 to 32 degrees Celsius, which is in the mid to upper 80s. Plenty warm water. Miami University oceanic heat content, which is the depth of how warm the water is and how deep the warm water is, showing that there is abundantly deep warm water across the Western Caribbean. Remember, this hasn't been tapped yet this year. There's, I think, maybe besides Beryl, which was way too long ago to matter now, the deepest, warmest water left in the Atlantic Basin is in the Western Caribbean, which, again, is not a surprise. It's this time of year, and you have a system, an area that hasn't really been hit yet by storms. So it's no surprise that you have that going on. So again, low levels, you have a broad low pressure trying to spin up. Low levels also, on the surface, you have little tropical waves moving through this area without much fanfare. In the upper levels, you have air moving away and being pulled away, meaning air is trying to rise in this area to get itself going, and it's all sitting over some of the deepest, warmest water in the Atlantic Basin. So you can kind of see here how we have enough ingredients for a system, but what might actually form out of this? Well, one of the things we use in the long term is these ensemble models, looking at the GFS and the European ensembles, which is our two biggest global models being ran multiple times every cycle, which they cycle 4 times a day. So 4 times a day, the computer takes all the data it has and makes a guess. And that's what we see in a model like we just showed you, like this. This is a deterministic, this is a model, the model's best guess. But the model can also guess over and over and over and over, tweaking small variables. Often you'll see this as the spaghetti models, quote unquote. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So the European model through 120 hours or through the next 5 days does not show much of any development. The GFS, again over here on tropical, this is not Tropical Tidbits, this is weathernerds.org, does show by 5 days some lower pressure trying to form. Now, if we go past 5 days, if we go, say, to 180 hours, go into early next week, this is going to be valid for Wednesday of next week. The GFS is showing many members showing a low pressure of some kind forming. The Euro at 180 hours is more conservative, which is not unusual for these models. But even the Euro, to some degree, if it wants to load, is showing that some kind of lower pressure may form. So you kind of take a mean of all this and say, well, both models have it. The GFS obviously has some stronger outliers. But we think that by early next week, we will have a low pressure system with some kind of defined center forming south of Cuba. And it looks like it's going to want to move north. Now, I can show you the latest GFS run. This brings a tropical storm north towards Cuba, moves it over the tip of Cuba, and then into the eastern Gulf of Mexico going into Thursday. And then by Friday, it's moved it into Florida. Now, a lot of Floridians are watching this. They're going, oh, crap, it's us. We're getting another one. Tampa, another Idalia, another Ian, or something like that. But if we go to the last run of the GFS, the one that ran before this, remember, we get 4 of these a day. So we get 4 of these guesses every day. It had a stronger storm that was further offshore, and I think in this case it winds up moving. So we got to go a few clicks up and then go to the previous run. So yeah, so the previous run moves us up into the Panhandle. If we go to the previous run from that, it's crossing Florida. If we go to the previous run from that, oh look, it's back in the Gulf of Mexico. All I'm doing is showing you the same time with different model runs. So when you see this, when you see 4 or 5 model runs with 4 or 5 wildly different solutions, and even the one before that has nothing formed really much at all, is that the model doesn't really know where this is going to go yet, but it is fairly confident that we're going to have genesis of some kind, and it's going to move into the eastern Gulf of Mexico area. Right now, anyone probably from Louisiana over needs to be watching this very carefully. I don't think this is going to get all the way over towards Texas or Mexico, but the steering flow is going to be some kind of broad trough in the upper levels, it looks like, which means this is going to want to drift more towards the east. But where that trough sets up matters greatly. It could be pulling it more towards the central Gulf Coast. It could be kind of just moving it towards the Big Bend or Panhandle. And it could pull it more aggressively towards South Florida and off the coast. And it could be obviously anything in between here as we go through that week. So I think that the confidence that we're going to see something is fairly high. I think at this point there's a lot of ingredients on the table and the setup looks pretty ripe for a storm, but what exactly forms, how organized it is, and where exactly it goes all remains to be seen, and a lot will change between now and then. So again, middle of the hurricane season, you should already have your plan ready, but that is kind of an explanation on what everybody's talking about, and hopefully in enough detail to make sense and get something out of it, but it's not so detailed that we're lost in the sauce, and not have no idea what we're talking about. Hopefully that makes some sense. But that is what I got for you guys this evening. And anyone on the Gulf Coast of any kind needs to be looking, watching for the next week. But, enjoy your life, do your thing. There's no reason to worry yet. We're going to keep watching it and just tackle it as it comes. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. I'm not going to do a video on this every day because nothing's going to change in the next 4 or 5 days. But as this becomes a threat, I will have videos on it, of course, through landfall. And then on the Facebook page, we'll be tracking it daily until, landfall and beyond as well. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. As always, thanks for watching and have a good one.